Good morning. It is now 10:29, 10:30. I will call the Surgeon Water Board Pension Committee meeting to order. Special Counsel, call the roll.
Director Pacho,
Here.
Director Scholas,
Here.
Director Markowitz, Mr. Heller, Mr. Davis, Ms. Jonesy,
Here.
Mr. McBull. Chair, we do not have a quorum. However, we may do proceed with presentation items only and no action items.
Okay, thank you. And welcome, Mitchell, this morning.
Thank you.
Presentation item, first one is the Employees Retirement System of the Surgeon Water Board of New Orleans, the evaluation report as of January 1, 2023. Mitchell?
Yes, sir. Is this on? Yes. Gray, is the PowerPoint in here? Let me just skip ahead to that. The PowerPoint covers as a summary what's in this report, but we can come back to it if you have any questions. All right. So today, the agenda is to present the 2023 valuation results for the pension plan, to look at a recent history of the actuarial determined contribution and the actual contribution history. And then we'll move into the cost of living adjustment for 2023 and discuss what's next. And of course, Q&A does not have to wait till the end. Please ask questions as I go if you have any. So we'll start with plan membership. This shows both the membership as of 22 and January 1, 23. There's a slight increase in the active membership from 1101 to 1113. Pretty hefty increase in the number of vested terminated members. Those are folks who have terminated but are vested and have a right to future benefits, provided they don't withdraw their employee contributions. Typically, we see this number go up and down. It's a timing issue that many of these people will probably withdraw after the valuation date, so that number may come back down next year. Non-vested terminated, those folks who did not reach 5 years of vested service and are just owed a return of employee contributions. And the retiring beneficiaries, those who are in pay status receiving an annuity. And you can see the total membership increase from 2266 to 2324 year over year. So, you know, we're having folks depart the active population, enter those other two categories or three categories, and are replaced by new hires. Year over year, the change in the actual accrued liability, this is the amount that we're funding towards with the plan assets. Last year, the liability at 1/1/22 was $350.5 million. During the year, you accrue a normal cost. That's the present value of the accruals earned by the employees during the year, the increase in their benefits or the value of their benefits, $5.3 million. Interest cost, which is the passage of time. There's one less year to discount these benefits as people age a year. So that's what that $23.9 million represents. Actual losses of $4.1 million, that's when plan experience is different from the assumptions that we use. For example, if there are fewer terminations than we expected or more retirements than we expected, you might have a loss. Or in this case, we'll talk about it, if pay increases are higher than expected. We didn't change any assumptions last year, and $27.5 million in benefit payments were made during the year. You'll see that number fluctuate year to year, partially because there are new retirees. Of course, there's retirees that pass away and drop out, but also it just depends on the timing of those in the drop and when they exit and receive their drop payments, and so that causes some variability. Last item 7, city and other transfers. When there were net transfers into the plan from other plans, and so that's at $0.7 million. And so you can see year over year, the liability went up from 350.5 to 357. This slide shows the change in assets year over year for both 21 and 22. If we focus on the right-hand column, we started at $274.5 million and ended at $223.4. The big change there was the investment losses during the year of $38.7 million, with increases due to employer and employee contributions during the year. But that 14.4% rate of return net of expenses put some upward pressure on the contribution this year. whereas last year we had the opposite, almost the exact opposite, with a 15% positive return. So, we like many other investments, you all, had a loss during 2022. Now, although there were big losses last year, under the funding policy of this plan, we don't use market value of assets to determine the contribution. We use actuarial value of assets, which smooths investment returns over a 7-year period. And the idea there is, we're funding for the long term, and rather than just look at the assets on a mark-to-market basis at the beginning of each year, which would build in volatility to the assets, as shown by the red line, which is the market value. If you did use market value in your funding policy, your contribution would vary greatly year over year. So the sort of blue-green line there, which is much smoother, you can see it kind of averages out those ups and downs. And so last year at 1/1/22, the actual value of assets was below the market value. This year it's above, but you can see how much smoother that is, and that reduces volatility in your contributions. And as noted in the bullet at the top, the difference between the market value and the actuarial value at 1/1/23 is $30.1 million, because we're deferring some losses using that smoothing technique, and we'll recognize those over a 7-year period. So the unfunded accrued liability, this is the piece that gets amortized and funded as part of the employer contribution. This shows a 3-year history of that, and it has gone up and down. So it was $101 million unfunded in 21. Those investment returns produced a lower unfunded of $98.7 million last year, and then this year we returned to the $103 million level. And like I said, the smoothing reduces a lot of that asset volatility, but there were these liability losses of about $4 million related to pay increases, and we'll talk about that on this slide. So you may recall, under the funding policy, we amortize the unfunded liability in layers. So every year we look at gains and losses, and those get amortized over 25 years. Of course, a few years ago we switched to a 30-year close period on the amount of liability that was unfunded at that time, and that's down to 27 years. And so we're over the next 27 years, we're aiming to fully fund the plan, but there'll be gains and losses during that time, and those will get spread out. So there were liability losses of $4 million, as we discussed. The market value had a loss of $39 million, but because of that smoothing, only $2 million of those losses get recognized and amortized this year. So there's a lot of benefit to that smoothing. So you have a $6 million total loss that gets amortized as a new layer, the $4 million liability plus the $2 million asset or AVA loss. And then the other big change this year was earnable compensation increased more than expected. And I've referenced the city ordinance that I'm sure you're aware of, that in the one-time cost of living adjustment of 5% in 22, and then another 5% budgeted in 23. And then there were some other just normal course raises in compensation that we did expect. But yes.
Could you explain a little bit more on the layers?
Yes.
And the year-over-year change in layers, what that means?
Yes. So let me skip ahead to this slide. So the unfunded liability as of 1/1/23 is $104 million. You can see that on the leftmost bar. It looks like it goes to 110, but you'll see that at the bottom where there's 0, and so there's some negative bases for gains. So if you sum those up, you get the red line, which is a little hard to see on the left side, but you can see it curved to the right. And so the dark blue at the top represents cumulative losses, and so a portion of that is that $6 million I just talked about. And so that's going to get amortized over 25 years, and it's hard to see in this, on the screen, but you can see at the far right near the end, but before the end of this amortization period, the blue at the top disappears. We fully amortize that. The big gray one or light sort of blue that's the tallest bar there, that's that transition liability. And you'll see that gets fully amortized in another 27 years. And so that's that a couple of years ago, we closed it off at 30 years. Before that, there was an open rolling 30. When you have that open period, it's very hard to fully fund a plan. You need some big gains, either asset returns or liability gains to make that work. And so the closed amortization allows the plan to get fully funded over time. So, there's all these different layers, the assumption changes we had after we did an experience study, that's the red, and that increased the liability sum, and that gets amortized severally over 25 years. But every year, we'll add either something at the top or the bottom, a negative number, which will increase the total payment or decrease it depending on whether it's a gain or a loss. But each piece gets amortized over a separate period. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the timetable for our next experience study?
Next year in 24. So the last one we did, it was for the 5-year period ending December 31, 2018, and we put that together in 2019. This year, at the end of this year, we'll have the census through the end of 23, and we'll put the report together in 24. Let's see what else, just back to this slide. I think the only other point I wanted to make was that even though those payroll losses of the higher than expected increases in payroll created a $4 million liability loss and an associated increase in the normal cost or that present value of accrual because employees' pay is higher, thus their accrued benefits growing faster. Because we're doing a level dollar amortization as opposed to a level percent of pay, those prior year amounts are unchanged, but as a percent of pay, it's a lower percent because the payroll base is bigger. So we'll see that even though your contribution goes up as a dollar amount, it's a lower amount as a percent of pay because your payroll base has grown more than your dollar contribution has grown. So I think we discussed this slide. So here we have the year-over-year comparison of the development of the employer contribution in 22 and 23. Again, item 1A is that normal cost. That's that value of the accruals this year. And you can see it went up, as shown in the far right column, by $535,000 year over year. And again, most of that is driven by those pay losses of pay being higher than expected. A little bit's due to a few more employees than there were a year ago, but that's a very small difference. The amortization of the unfunded accrued liability in 1B, you see there's a new layer of roughly $500,000, and that just gets added to that $7.87 million, producing $8.37 in the current year. So that's how you pay for that. Then the total contribution in 1C, this is the total that's going to be funded by the employer and the employees, increased by $1,037,000 year over year. But the employer's contribution is, that total reduced by the employee's contribution of 6% of payroll. So because payroll is higher in line 2, the employee contributions are going to go up from about $2.8 million to $3.2 year over year. And the net effect is an increase in line 3 of $628,000. So the employer contribution for 2023 is $11.2 million. But as you can see in line 4, look at the increase in the payroll base year over year. And this is pensionable pay, not total pay. So it's different than your total payroll because it doesn't include overtime and some other components of pay. But nonetheless, payroll for the employee population pension pay went from 46 to 53 million. And so when you look at the contribution, the employer contribution is a percentage of payroll, that line 3 divided by line 4. Again, even though the dollar amount went up as a percent of pay, we go down from 22.8% to 21, or a reduction in 1.7%. That makes sense? All right. This slide just shows a history of the employee and employer contributions. The employee are that red, and those are 6%. That contribution has been 6% for a long time, and the employer has the variability, but it has been between 22 and close to 23% for each of the last 5 years. So you see it goes up and down with those gains and losses and with the changes in payroll. This slide also shows a history and dollar amounts. And the first column is the actuarial determined contribution. That's what we determine. Again, that amount is based on estimated payroll for the year. But then, once we tell you the percentage, 22% last year, 21% this year, you apply it to actual payroll. So the actual employer contribution is going to be a little bit different than what we estimate based on estimated payroll. And that's what that next column is in the middle. But it's relatively close. There have been a couple years where it varies a little bit, but all in all, it tracks pretty closely. And then the employee contributions of 6% of pay. You know, as payroll has grown, it increases over time, and it's been pretty close to 3 million the last few years.
So the 21.84%, or whatever that percentage is,
Mhm.
that's calculated based on each monthly payout to the employee? Like what is the, or is it in a yearly chunk? What is the?
Every single payroll cycle, every week, that amount gets transferred to the pension fund.
Okay, so it tracks all the changes in our payroll costs.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, that's why that middle column is going to be different than you know, our best estimate based on what you all tell us the pay rate is at the beginning of the year. Well, before I move on, the next slide starts to get into the cost of living. Any questions about the funding or any of those slides? Okay. So moving on to the cost of living adjustment. The rules and regulations provide for an annual cost of living adjustment to the annuitants in the plan, those receiving monthly payments. It's based on the CPIW, or the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners, from August to August each year. But there is a 2% maximum, so if the CPI exceeds 2%, the COLA is capped at 2%. If the CPI is negative, then the CPI is flat. We don't reduce, the COLA is flat. We don't reduce payments if the CPI is negative. It's only available to annuitants over 65. So for someone who retires at, say, age 60, they're not eligible for the COLA until they reach 65. And if you turn 65 in the middle of the year, you'll get half of the COLA for that year, that first year you turn 65. The other important element of this is the COLA is only applied to the first $10,000 of the original annuity amount at retirement. So if your annual payment is more than $10,000, you're only going to get a COLA on $10,000. And as a result, it's a simple COLA as opposed to simple interest as opposed to compound interest, because we're always looking back to that original amount. We're not building it up over time, and we'll illustrate that with some examples. And of course, employees in the drop period, while they're in the drop still working, they're not eligible for a COLA, even if they're over 65. Once they retire and commence their monthly payments, if they're over 65 at that time, they'll get a COLA.
So there's only a max change payout of $200 per year?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Brutal.
But while you may say, well, like in years like this when inflation is high, that doesn't seem to cover things. You know, a lot of plans don't offer COLAs, so any COLA is good. And also for folks, you know, this benefit is only one piece of their retirement income. Social Security is indexed to inflation as well. So they're not seeing a total reduction in purchasing power. But you're right that when it's higher than 2%, or you know, it's not their full benefit, they're not getting a full inflation protection, but they are getting some.
And it's not compounded, you said? So
It's not compounded. And I'll kind of go through that in an example here. So in this example, we'll assume a retiree is age 65 already, so they're eligible for the COLA. And the CPIW for the first year of this example is over 2% at 2.5%, and the next year is 1%. So for the first example, we'll look at someone whose retirement allowance at retirement is below $10,000, $9,000 in this example. Because 2.5% in year one is greater than 2, the COLA is capped at 2. So you can see 2% times 9,000 is 180. So their annuity goes up from 9,000 to 9,180. In year two, the CPI is 1%, so the COLA is not capped. They get the full 1%, but it's only on the $9,000 of their original benefit, as opposed to the 9,180. If it was a 9,180, that would be compound interest, but because it's 9,000, it's simple interest, and they'll get a $90 increase. So it goes up from 9,180 you add $90 to it and go to $92.70. In the second example, now we've got someone over the $10,000 amount that's subject to COLA because they're getting $15,000. So you go through the same exercise. The 2% is applied to $10,000 instead of the 15 because of that cap. And they get $200, like you said. And then total annuity goes from 15 to 15,200. The next year they get 1%, and again it's that base 10,000, and so they get an extra $100 and end up with 15,300 at the start of the next year.
And the rules on the COLA are based on our rules and regs?
That's right. They're built into the rules and regs. That's right.
And is there like a state trigger on any of COLAs from a statewide perspective, or is it just?
Yeah, there's nothing in the state constitution that says you need to do something different. You know,
Okay.
so it's what the plan says.
Gotcha.
This is a history, I'd say recent, but it's about 20-year history of the COLA. And you can see in any year in which the COLA is above 2%, it gets, or the CPI is above 2%, excuse me, the COLA is capped at 2%. There's a couple years that are red where the CPI actually was negative, but there's no harm to the participants there. It just stays flat at 0% for those years. And you can see the last couple years, as you might expect, inflation's been a bit higher than prior years. And so this past year, August to August, it was 8.6%, but we're, again, playing caps it at 2%.
And what is I just don't want to do all that math right now, but when you look at the actual CPI change versus what we got in our plan, what's that? Do you know that difference?
I don't have that, but
The last 20 years.
Yeah, I can send that to you after the meeting. I don't have that
Thank you.
with me. The one sort of, I guess, trick about that is we can give you that figure of the CPI change versus the COLA percentage, but that won't tell the full story because it really depends by individual if they have more than 10,000 or less than 10,000. You know,
Oh, yeah,
because it
yeah.
would further
It's like
dampen.
full
Yeah.
hand play out, yeah.
But I'm happy to prepare that. So here we break those 900 annuitants. It's actually $899. On an earlier slide, we said 900 annuitants. Here it's $899, and that's because in the process of preparing the COLA after doing the valuation, we learned that somebody died in late December. So we, of course, removed them from the actual COLA implementation. But we split the population into line 1, which are the annuitants under 65 who do not get a COLA. So there's 171 of those with about $5.5 million in annual benefits being paid. The drop annuitants, and we're not looking at their age there because they just aren't eligible for a COLA yet. 2.6. And then we split the population of those over 65 into 2 categories, those below 10,000, where they're getting the full, in this case, 2% this year on their full benefit, and those above 10,000, where they're getting 2% on 10,000. If you were to take, you think maybe, oh, I'll take the 15 million times 2%, it should equal that 98,000. That's a little bit more than 98,000. The reason is there's some folks who turned 65 this past year and don't get the full COLA. But at the end of the day, there's 24 million in annual benefits being paid. You may recall I said there was 27.5 million paid last year. That extra 3.5 were the drop payments. So that's why this number is lower than the number we showed on that earlier slide of actual benefit payments, as well as it also included return of employee contributions for the non-vested. And the total COLA to be applied to benefits is $113,139, so increasing from 24 to about 24.15 million year over year. And so I know there's not a quorum today, but one of the resolutions is stating, asking for approval to increase benefits by that 113,000.
And we have to do that as an adjustment every time we get this kind of report, or is there a way we can sort of automate that and say, yeah, that's what needs to happen?
The practice here has been to approve it every year. It's written into the document. So I'm not an attorney. It's common for governmental plans to approve both the contribution or the valuation report and the COLA. But I'm not sure why the COLA has to be approved, you know, legally when it's written into the document.
Because we don't have a choice.
Right,
Like, because I was like, what if we didn't?
right.
We still got to do it.
I believe so, but that might be a good question for
Yolanda.
the ERISA counsel,
Ed.
John Weiler, but that has been the practice, so
Yeah, I will certainly research the issue and get back to the committee members on it.
Sure, because if it's something that has happened anyway, I don't know that we need to.
sure.
Vote on it, yeah.
Yeah,
Because saying no isn't an option.
yeah, that's my understanding. But again, that's where the attorneys come in, but yes.
So on lines 1 and 2, do we have, or do you know the breakout of that population that is annuities under 10,000 versus over?
We can give that to you, but we don't have that in this presentation simply because it doesn't affect the COLA,
Yeah.
but yeah, I would suspect it's a similar proportion, you know, so there's 518 out of the roughly 750 annuitants over 65, or 650, excuse me. It's probably a similar proportion in that 171. But again, I can pull that together for you. And this last slide just talks about kind of what we were just talking about. Historically, the pension committee will recommend board of trustees adopt both the employer contribution and the COLA increase. We have some draft resolutions that I believe are in your packet today, but of course, without the quorum, we'll be moving to approve those. And the annual employer contribution, in summary, you know, decreased as a percent since last year, but we'll decrease it mid-year, and that'll ensure that at least that 21% is contributed to the plan for 23. And again, the COLA that we determine, although we're presenting it here in July, it's retroactive to the beginning of the year. So once it's approved, everyone will get, let's say this happened on July 1, they get a half-year payment, you know, 6 months worth of those $200 increases or whatever it is, and then their monthly payments going forward would be adjusted with the increase. So the timing doesn't harm a participant that it gets done mid-year. Other items, in late June, we completed the annual benefit statements. I don't know if those have been distributed yet. I know that's a big process to distribute those, but those at least are in your hands now to get distributed to the employees, and it shows both their accrued benefits and projected benefits at various retirement dates to give them an idea of what their benefit is and what it will be if they work to retirement age. Next on the horizon is this pension portal. This is going to be online access for both administrators and plan members to perform benefit estimates. So rather than just having the paper statement based on information at January 1 each year, they can go in and payroll feeds will go in there throughout the year, and they can estimate their benefits using more current information than waiting for an annual update. There's a lot of work to be done there. We're still working with Stephanie and Courtney to collect a lot of information, and because a lot of the historical data is in 2 older legacy databases, that's taken some time to compile, but I think we're making some progress. So that will be coming. Hopefully, we'll get the data soon and be in a position to put that together. And as I mentioned earlier, that the next experience study is scheduled for next year. And so we'll complete that around the time we complete the valuation next year. That is it. These are obviously the resolutions for those 2 items: the employer contribution at 21% of payroll, and then I think the COLA is the next one.
Can I ask
Okay.
for another next step potentially? Can we set up a training with you and the pension committee members to
Sure.
kind of get into more of the details of the population, the trends, all that sort of thing, so that we can kind of understand the broader picture when we start looking at the trees?
Sure.
Yeah, we've done that in the past.
Mhm.
So newer members, you can have, we don't necessarily need it in a committee meeting, but we definitely have done that.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I dug all through that.
But I was,
Yes.
I'm hoping that I can have the same opportunity.
Yes. So yeah, we probably did that 4 years ago now, and so it is good. And so when I'm sitting here talking about layers and unfunded liability,
Right.
have a training session on that is useful. So
Great.
I'm happy to get that
Okay.
scheduled.
Yeah. Any
should I?
questions for Mitchell? Okay, thank you, Mitchell.
All right, thank you all.
Ed, do we need a motion to defer those action items?
No, in fact, because you don't have a quorum, you can't entertain a motion.
Okay. Okay,
But I think it bears the question, I don't know what the pleasure of the committee relative to getting the action plans approved at the board. What do you think we need to do to gain that in terms of presentation, or maybe a shorter one, no presentation?
So what I would suggest is that with the approval of the chair is that since we do have a trustee meeting scheduled after the next board meeting, we could give this as a small action item presentation at the trustee meeting, and then we'll be able to accomplish that next week.
yeah.
Okay.
That's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just wanted-
We have one information item. The actuarial evaluation report as of January 1, 2023. I actually make special note of that. Greg, did you want to comment initially on that?
The actuarial, the full report that we saw, it was just the thing that was sent around ahead of time. The Mitchell just summarized.
And I kind of
Yeah.
blew through it at the beginning of this, but this is the report.
Yeah, and that was forwarded to all Board of Trustees members in June. And then, so that's all I had.
Okay. Okay. I think we need a motion to go into executive session.
Again, if I might comment, yeah, because you don't have a quorum, you can't take any motions to the floor. You necessarily need a quorum of your committee in order to take any action at all. And so to take an action to go into executive session is not allowed without a quorum.
So again, I suggest that we table that
Yeah,
until
Yes, till the trustee meeting.
Trustee
next
Okay.
week.
Okay. Do we have any public comment?
None?
None. If we have no public comment, and if there are no other matters, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
You can just call it, Mr. Chair.
Just call it.
All right.
Call it to an end.
A motion to adjourn.
just say you were adjourned.
We adjourn. Motion carries.
Thank you.
I wasn't making notes as we went, yes, about the split, like the over under 10,000.
I'm
Oh, and